And joining us now to talk about more about this is Yardena Schwartz, award-winning journalist and best-selling author of the new book, Ghosts of a Holy War. Thanks so much for being here with us.
Thank you so much for having me,
Very
Bianca.
timely that this book comes out because you're exploring how history shapes current conflicts with lessons from the past. But how is this most relevant to what is happening right now with the ceasefire on the table?
So this book is something I began working on back in 2019, long before October 7th, and I went out to write a book about this massacre in 1929 in what was then British Mandate Palestine that set the ground for this entire conflict and explains everything we see today. And after October 7th, it became hauntingly clear how long the true history of this conflict has been ignored and the cost of continuing to ignore the lessons of history.
And it's interesting because I kind of did a deep dive into your book, and you see that this was an area where Muslims and Jews and Arabs all were at peace. And that's what everyone is hoping for today. So talk about, when we look at what is potentially on the table, how does that shape history in the Middle East potentially in the future?
So before this massacre, as you said, Jews and Muslims coexisted in relative peace. And in 1929, this is when the campaign of disinformation, propaganda, and the weaponization of Islam began to disintegrate that peace.
And that was in Hebron.
It continues, and that was in Hebron, in British Mandate Palestine, one of the most ancient Jewish communities in the world. And in the massacre of 1929, that community was decimated as a result of a campaign of disinformation and propaganda and the weaponization of Islam that we see Hamas perpetuating today. You know, on October 7th, they named their operation Al-Aqsa Flood. And yesterday, with the news of the potential ceasefire and hostage deal, Hamas and many Palestinians in Gaza were celebrating and declaring victory and praising October 7th and vowing to continue to try to liberate Al-Aqsa, this mosque in Jerusalem. And that was what led to the massacre in 1929 as well. And there are so many more parallels between these massacres.
So you're kind of saying that history will, in fact, possibly repeat itself?
If we continue to ignore the lessons of history.
Interesting.
And I wrote this book to help so many people around the world who really cannot understand why this conflict persists and why every peace effort has failed. Because reading my book, it's really clear to see how we got here and also how we can find a way out.
Sure. Talk about, I mean, people here living in the U.S., what impactful role does the U.S. play in facilitating or complicating the ceasefire in the Middle East?
The U.S. plays the most important role. I mean, we see that in how the U.S. has managed to bring about this ceasefire and hostage deal, which I hope will go into place very soon. Yet, I think that many policymakers and negotiators, not just in the U.S., but across the West, fail to understand the power of religion and disinformation in fueling this conflict and see it through kind of a Western lens of, you know, territory and politics, when religion plays the most prominent role in fueling this conflict.
Maybe you could expand on that just a little bit before you go. What role does this spiritual roots of the Middle East play in trying to negotiate a ceasefire?
So a lot of the disinformation and propaganda we see is from, sadly, from Islamic leaders in the Middle East. And we saw that with, you know, obviously Hamas, this radical Islamist organization that seeks to create an Islamist state in place of Israel. This isn't the first organization that has sought that. And the man who ignited the massacre of 1929, he was the leader of Palestinian Muslims under British rule. He did the same, and he kind of set the formula for every Palestinian leader since. And you know, it's been the Palestinian people who've suffered the most from the wars that their leaders have.
I mean, you really do have to have a foundational understanding of history and how it applies to what we're seeing today. But Yardena, thank you for writing this book. Where can people find it real fast?
Anywhere books are sold, Amazon, Barnes & Noble. It's available in ebook and Audible, as well as the hardcover. And later this year, a paperback edition will be released.
That's Yardena Schwartz. Thank you much. Ghosts of a Holy War.
Thank you so much, Bianca. Thank you.